Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. We broadcast locally on Radio Northern Beaches and around Australia on the Community Radio Network, complements of the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia. Bit of a mouthful, but what the heck, we are part of a network of over 450 radio stations around the big wide brown land, and we get picked up by roughly about 15 or so regional stations, and we really appreciate our country listeners as well as you city folk out there as well here on the beautiful northern beaches of Sydney and beyond. So we welcome back to the microphone again Stuart Sheary, who is a subject matter expert from the Institute of Financial Professionals Australia. You may have known this crew previously as the Taxpayers Association, and this is an organisation, ladies and gentlemen, that's been around for well over 100 years, representing the interests of taxpayers. Now, Stuart, you've got about 4,000 permanent members in tax agents, and you also have quite a large constituency of people that tune into your website and your content pretty much on a monthly basis. That's fairly correct, isn't it?
Right, and we have many, many more who subscribe to our daily and weekly updates that provides updates as to tax and super.
Brilliant. So look, today what we're going to talk about, I mean, you can't go a day in Sydney without talking about darn real estate. And given the fact that, you know, we're now looking at the situation where Vegas and Brisbane is overtaking Melbourne as a higher median price of real estate. Getting onto the property ladder is becoming even more topical. Now, for those of you that are Gen Z, Gen X, I don't know what Gen capital letter it is, but if you think that baby boomers had it easy, when I was in my 20s, we were talking nothing about buying darn real estate, even in the late 80s and early 90s, because it was so hard to get a deposit together. Totally different set of circumstances, but the conversation, I think, is still very much the same. Now, it's been a bit of a political football, and I've asked Stuart to come on the show today because we now have a scheme that involves being able to tap into $5 trillion worth of savings called superannuation. Now, this is so common. It seems to roll around every 3 years in the election cycle. Politicians love talking about, hey, let's tap into super to help kids buy a home. So we have something called the First Home Super Saver, FHSS. And the first place, if you Google that or your favorite internet search engine, DuckDuckGo or Bing or whatever you use, it will come up and it will say Australian Tax Office. And I thought, Stuart, what a good place to start. What is the FHSS?
FHSS actually is the First Home Super Saver Scheme. Super Saver Scheme, First Home Super Saver Scheme. So it's a bit of a tongue twister there. So that's why they say FHSS. Yeah, and basically it's a scheme that allows you to pull money out of super to buy your first home. But of course, there's a few caveats along the way.
Oh, well, what would be a government scheme without caveats? Come on. So let's start getting it. So I'm reading the notes. It said it offers a tax-effective way for young people. You don't have to be young. I mean, my next door neighbours were 61 when they bought their first home, and they actually got a first home by a grant. So that's not age dependent, is it?
Well, I consider young anyone below age 75 because anyone who can make a contribution to super is someone who can access this scheme. And so, yeah, people between the ages of 18 and 75 can take advantage of the First Home Super Saver Scheme.
All right. So in a nutshell, what is the FHSS all about?
Well, basically, it allows you to make additional voluntary contributions into superannuation and then potentially withdraw those contributions at a later time when you're ready to buy your first home, together with the notional earnings on those eligible contributions, and you can pull that out and use that as a deposit on your first home. But of course, the caveats there are it is your first home. So you can't have owned a home in the past. You must be over the age of 18. So whilst you might be able to make contributions before 18, you can't access them under the First Home Super Saver Scheme until after 18. And you must never have made withdrawn money under the FHSS scheme in the past. And finally, of course, you've got to have made voluntary super contributions.
So there's some really interesting terms you've used, and the first one I want to pick up and extrapolate a little bit and flesh out is notional earnings. So let's say, for example, I chuck in some non-concessional money. So this is after-tax money into my super. And let's say, for example, I decide to invest in crypto and it goes through the roof and makes a gazillion %. I can't draw all of that out, can I? That's not notional, is it?
Great point. No. But it can work the other way. The actual investments inside the super fund might go backwards, and because it's based on statutory or notional earnings, you can still draw an additional amount out. Those notional earnings, they're basically calculated based on, and it's a bit of a technical term here, the shortfall interest charge, or SIC, as the accountants will know it as being, and it's around 6.5% at the moment. So we're going to assume that the earnings on those voluntary contributions have earned a return of 6.5% based on current rates.
No more, no less, and it doesn't matter whether you've won or lost in your own super account. That's what you're basically
right.
saying.
So it gives you a bit of certainty, and certainty above the cash rate. So if you had that money parked in a cash deposit, you probably wouldn't be earning 6.5%.
That's very true. But again, when you look at all the different advertisements that particularly the industry super funds are doing to go out and blow their own trumpet, I see numbers above that. I'm not going to quote because specific numbers will point, and we don't talk about brands on the show. But I guess, so again, I'm reading these notes. It says the person can contribute up to 15,000 per financial year, up to a total of 50 grand in voluntary contributions.
That's correct. So when we're talking about voluntary contributions, it's just that. So contributions over and above, say, superannuation guarantee. So for example, if your only contributions in the fund are from your employer, you're not eligible for the First Home Super Saver Scheme. So voluntary contributions include non-concessional contributions, as you just mentioned, personal deductible contributions, and salary sacrifice contributions. But you can't get carried away. There are limits, as you mentioned, of $15,000 each year, subject to a lifetime cap of $50,000 of total contributions that you can put into super under this scheme and be eligible to withdraw back out for a deposit on a home.
So it does sound a little convoluted, I guess, but looking, I guess, to use an old Keating saying, the devil is in the detail. So the key factor here is that the funds that can be used cannot be super guaranteed. So this has to be money over and above what normally flows in through the normal SG systems. That's correct, right?
Absolutely. Again, in all cases, it's just going to be personal deductible contributions, salary sacrifice, or non-concessional contributions that you can pull out of super.
Now, I'm looking through, I've prepared some questions here as well. Now, I'm curious, you've mentioned that they can't draw into the FHSSS if they're over 18, but can they contribute to this pool of money if they're under 18?
They can, yeah. So, for example, they're 17 and they've got a part-time job, for example. They could contribute a little bit of money into super. But if you're under 18, often it might be, say, a parent or grandparent who's worried about their kids' ability to buy a first home, maybe. So what they might do is perhaps give the child some money, and the child, you must hope, will put that money into super on their own behalf, and they could potentially put that money into super and build a bit of money for their first home.
Okay, that's interesting. So they can accept contributions from friends, family, etc. I mean,
no, yeah. What I'm alluding to is where a parent or grandparent, they're going to have to give the money to the child and trust the child does the right thing and put the money into super. So the money has to come from the member, not the parent or grandparent. It has to be a contribution that the member has made.
Okay, so it's not via a sports bet account or something like that. So
no. Well, if it's salary sacrifice, it can come obviously from the employer, but otherwise it has to be from the member or the employer.
I guess I'm curious. Normally, something like this would get. Maybe I live under a rock, but when did the system actually first come into place?
Yeah, good question. It's been around for quite some time, and it's growing in popularity. It started in the first year you could actually access under the First Home Super Saver scheme was from 1 July 2018 from recollection. So the first years that you could contribute as part of the scheme was from 1 July 2017. But so it's been around for a few years.
So this was brought in by the coalition. That would have been during either just end of Turnbull, start of Morrison. Would that be about right? I'm just guessing.
Sounds, yeah, it might have been before Morrison, but yeah, like you, I'm guessing. But from recollection, it was a coalition policy.
So the policy's been around for 7 odd years now. So again, I'm surprised, but you're saying that the momentum is growing around the ability to, I guess, build for that deposit, because this is what when you're talking a maximum of 50,000 plus notional interest, let's say 6.5%, that roughly 6.5% at the moment. We're not going to be looking at too much more than if they started back in that time, you're still looking at roughly about 70 odd grand. I mean, hey, it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, isn't it?
Absolutely. That it is limited. Keep in mind, though, if you leave it in there for a number of years, obviously the notional earnings will grow over time. And one of the biggest advantages, of course, is the ability to get a tax deduction for a deposit on the home. Because what other scheme out there is there where you can get a tax deduction on a deposit? So if you make a contribution into super, you can claim a tax deduction on that personal contribution. And that will give you, that tax deduction, if you like, will give you more money to buy a home down the track as well. So it's the concessional contributions that make this scheme quite attractive.
Okay, well, look, we're just about half time here on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm really pleased to have at the microphone and camera this week Stuart Sherry, who is a subject matter expert from the Institute of Financial Professionals of Australia, better known as the Taxpayers Association, as a previous iteration, but IFPA these days, ifpa.com.au. We are going to take a short break and we'll be back in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments, and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels, or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson. I'm really pleased to have at the microphone and camera Stuart Sherry from the Institute of Financial Professionals of Australia. He is a subject matter expert. And today we are talking about the First Home Super Saver Scheme, FHSSS. There's almost a Susan Lay joke in there, but I won't. I won't. I'm not going to be nasty. But look, before we went to the break, we were talking about some of the concessions that are available and the ability to leverage our wonderful superannuation scheme to help people get into their first home. So I think from a practical perspective, I wanted to discuss with you, Stuart, now, what are the practical ways of doing this? Not just the actual taxpayer themselves that's going to be doing this, but people around them that might be able to help. So let's start a scenario. Let's say a kid doing a paper run at 15 or 16 odd years old, and she wants to start building this nest egg to be looking at in the future, being able to step into some real estate. So what's the first things that they would be doing?
Yeah, so first of all, they'd have to open up a superannuation fund. So most employers don't pay superannuation guarantee to minors. You have to be over the age of 18. before employers are generally obliged to pay super guarantee. I think there's some thresholds there. If they're earning significant part-time income, then or doing significant hours, they might get some super guarantee there. But then that child would need to make a voluntary contribution into super, such as a non-concessional contribution. So they'd have to be quite diligent there and or thinking ahead, if you like, and open the super fund. And then second step is make that non-concessional contribution into super. They're probably not going to be making a deductible contribution into super because they're not paying too much by way of tax if they're doing a paper run.
Okay, so let's say we fast forward, say 2-3 years. They're now almost turning 19, 20 odd years old. They've been doing part-time jobs, hospo jobs. I just picking up on my own kids. They were picking up dog walking, you name it. They're doing anything and everything to start scraping up some cash and building up some assets rather than just sitting there tapping on the bank of mum and dad. And so let's say, for example, they've got their super account now and they've been chucking non-concessional contributions. So this is after-tax money, and they've got uncles, aunts, grandparents that have been saying, okay, here's something for you guys to tuck away for the future. What's happening with this money?
Yeah, well, it's the notional earnings, if you like. If that child is making those non-concessional contributions in super, it's growing at 6.5%, as we mentioned. But also keep in mind, if the individual is paying tax, or not paying tax, but rather has taxable income, they're lodging their tax return, they may well be also entitled to what we call the government co-contribution. So if they put in $1,000, the government will chip in $500. So that's a pretty good return on investment. It's a 50% return on investment.
Can you repeat that again? So if somebody is putting in $1,000 as a non-concessional contribution, NCC, into super, the government's going to give them another $500 in their super fund. Is that right?
Right. If their income is below a certain threshold, there's a number of eligibility criteria, but there is what we call the government co-contribution, where people who do have some employment income, so you've got to have some employment income, if they make a non-concessional contribution of, say, up to $1,000, the government will chip in $500. Now, of course, that $500 that the government chips in, that can't be accessed under the First Home Super Saver scheme, but it's good to have in super anyway. But of course, the $1,000 that you did put into super, that can be accessed as part of the First Home Super Saver scheme down the track.
I don't want to make too much of it, but I just want to point out to people listening, if you chuck $500 into your super account at 20 years old, and let's say it's building at, say, 6-7% a year, compounding over the next 45 years or 47 years, that $500 will turn into quite a handy chunk of change, and that's being given to you by the government for simply doing the right thing and contributing early in your savings history. So I just wanted to plant that seed, because the old thing of Keating, when he first started super back in the 90s, kept on talking about compounding, the magic of compounding. That's a great example. Chuck $500 in from the government when you're at that very young age. That can turn into some serious money when you are retiring. Sorry, I digress. Let's continue on. We're moving on a few years. They're in their mid-20s now. They're starting to get more regular work. What's happening?
Okay, if they start to get more regular work, their taxable income is higher, they might want to, rather than do non-concessional contributions, think about salary sacrificing into super or making personal deductible contributions to get their tax bill down and allow them to save even more for their first home. So you probably, as your taxable income increases over time, you probably want to switch to making concessional contributions, which include personal deductible and salary sacrifice.
Okay, now I've got a good question here that I wanted to pose to you. So how can parents help their children use the FHSSS? And what are the key rule? What's the key rule that they've got to make, that they've got to follow regarding that contribution?
Yeah, so as we're discussing, the parent can't actually make the contribution into super on behalf of the child. Rather, it would have to be the case of the parent giving the child the money, putting it into their bank account, and the child would have to make that contribution themselves, because it has to be, that contribution needs to be a member contribution, if you like, for them to be able to access the money under the First Home Super Saver scheme.
So the parent delivers the money into the bank account and then stands over the child whilst they press the button.
You've got to trust your kid. Yeah.
I swear, Mum and Dad, it's going in the right way. Okay. Okay. So is there a way for kids then with low income to benefit even more from super? And I know the answer to this already. It's a bit of a Dorothy Dixon, but what are we talking about when we're looking at low income? And it's a term. Is Listo part of this discussion?
Yeah, Listo. So the thinking behind the low income superannuation tax offset, I think that's anyway.
The Listo.
What they're saying is if your taxable income is below a particular threshold, it's unfair for you to pay contributions tax because that income that you would have received in your own name would have been taxed at zero because of the tax-free threshold. So what they're saying is if you make a concessional contribution such as a personal deductible contribution or salary sacrifice, they're going to, the government, will return the 15% contributions tax to your super fund. So that's what Listo is all about, returning the contributions tax.
So again, I just highlight to the listeners and viewers that there are really generous benefits there. I guess people don't get enamored with them because it's such a long-term horizon. When I talk to my kids, and my kids are 26, 28, and 30, and I talk to them about super, and they look at me and go, "Oh, Dad, that's so far in the future. How can I even think about talking about when I'm going to be 67 when I barely just made 30 years old, or 28 or 26?" And so you and I both know the power of compounding, and setting that seed now can have a huge impact. I mean, hopefully they'll still thank you. You may be in the grave long before they will look at it and go, wow. So let's move forward. Now, I guess we've done all this hard work. We've been diligent. We've watched, and our kids have grown this amount of non-concessional contribution plus the notional income. Comes the time and they're going, right, now's the time. What's the process for getting to the money?
Okay. So now they're serious about buying a house, and they're going to buy the house within the next 12 months, say. So now it's probably the best time to go to MyGov. So MyGov, and go to the ATO portal and ask the ATO for what we call a determination. So you do that on MyGov, and the determination will tell you how much you can take out as first home super saver scheme. So they'll calculate the notional earnings or interest that we've just been talking about, and they'll keep a record of those eligible contributions that you've made over the years, which were of course subject to the annual cap and lifetime cap of $50,000. And so you'll be able to then go, okay, I can take out $70,000. Fantastic. I will choose to take out that $70,000. Thank you very much. So you're now going to hit the button on MyGov to make an application to withdraw that amount. And the ATO then will speak to your super fund on your behalf and the super fund will then pay the ATO that money. And then the ATO will collect that money and pay it to you after relevant taxes.
Okay. So what kind of taxes may they be needing to pay on that? Let's say it is 70 grand, for example.
Yeah. Good point. So if you've been making non-concessional contributions over the years, and that's your voluntary contribution, then it's going to be very little, okay, because it's only the assessable amount of that withdrawal that's going to be subject to tax at marginal rates. So, but let's say
that'll be the 6% notional, wouldn't it?
If you've been making non-concessional contributions, well, that part of the withdrawal that relates to your non-concessional contributions, that's going to come out tax-free. You didn't get a tax deduction on the way in, and it'll be a bit harsh to tax you on the way out. So they're not going to tax you on that bit, but they're probably going to tax you a little bit on that notional earnings amount that you're pulling out of super. So that would be assessable. But if you had been claiming a tax deduction, so reducing your personal tax liability, then when you withdraw that money, that withdrawal will include an assessable amount. So that's deductible contributions, be it salary sacrifice or personal deductible contributions, that will be assessable. So you might be thinking, oh, well, I've paid 15% tax on the way in. It's a bit rough to be taxed on the way out. Good news there, though, is you'll get a 30% tax offset. So you've benefited by reducing your tax on the way in, and it's not that painful on the way out by virtue of this 30% tax offset that the ATO will give you.
When we're talking about, my last question, are there any traps or timeframes that people should be aware of when using the FHSSS? Is that what you're talking about, or is there other traps that they need?
Yeah, more so insofar as timeframes, the traps there are if you don't buy a home within 12 months, but technically the ATO will give you an extension of another 12 months. So if you don't buy a house within 2 years, you're going to be subject to a 20% tax bill on the assessable withdrawal. So that's one of the traps to consider.
Oh, so that means after you've drawn the money down.
Yeah, so I want to buy a house, I withdraw the money, and then 2 years later, I still haven't bought a house. The ATO will say, well, come on, that's not the purpose of the scheme. You're supposed to buy a place. You didn't. We're going to send a tax bill your way. So that's one thing to consider. Of course, and another trap would be to go out, buy the place, and then 2 weeks later go, oh, I could actually take advantage of this scheme. I want to withdraw my money, because once you've signed the contract to purchase a place, you've only got 14 days to go and get the money from the ATO. So generally better to withdraw the money before signing any contract.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, good considerations. But hey, even in today's world, 70 grand is a great booster to, and again, I keep saying to people, you don't have to buy a big 4-bedroom house. Even back in the day, we started with an apartment. We started small and you build up, and that's, you get your foot on the first rung of the ladder. So look, Stuart, great to have you on the show again, talking about the FHSSS. Stuart Sherry from IFPA, always great to have you on the show. I look forward to welcoming you back. Thank you for being on Dollars and Making Sense.
Okay, enjoy your day.
You too. Bye-bye.